Welcome to the Alain Elkann interviews, an unprecedented window into the minds of some of the most well-known and respected figures of the last 25 years.
Today we talk to Jennifer Roberts, who was the CEO of Design Miami since 10 years. What does it mean, collectible design?
That's a good question. Well, usually if I'm explaining collectible design to the layman, I'll start by putting it in context. So, for example, if you take some of the great architects of the 20th century, like Frank Lloyd Wright or Jean Prouvé or let's say Oscar Niemeyer, essentially when they were like Frank Lloyd Wright, for example, when he would be designing houses, he would create bespoke furniture for those homes. That material today will often come into the market through galleries that are experts in that design or that architect or that period. So the pieces are typically unique, rare, or limited edition. So it could be a prototype, for example. And the people who collect it tend to be the people who are looking at the material that they've lived with in the same way that they look at art collecting.
You have always been very passionate and very interested in, let's say, furniture or collectible furniture. But after university, you went to several universities. But what did you do before in order to become the CEO of the Design Miami? That now is, if I'm not wrong, is 20 years old.
That's correct. I've been with Design Miami for half its life. Before Design Miami, I studied the decorative arts in London for a year, postgraduate, just a diploma program through Christie's. But really, I fell in love with looking at the built environment as a reflection of a societal, political reflection of a period of time, right? And you could look at like Thomas Jefferson to start with and the influences that influenced his buildings in the US. And basically, I love the decorative arts and architecture as a reflection of a period or a time in history, much like art history. And for me, I originally thought that I wanted to be an antiques dealer. So I started buying material in London while I was in school and selling it at the flea market in New York while keeping a full-time job. I realized very quickly that I was the only one repacking my car at the end of the day with my 18th century objects. And all of the 20th century vendors were driving off with empty vans. So I realized I was not very good at this and that the material that I liked was actually not in fashion at the time. So I kind of gave up on that idea when I realized I was never going to make a living. And I started to look at what the other vendors were selling while I was working for the magazine Antiques under the Brandt family at the time. And I just started to observe the market was really shifting. I noticed that all the antiques dealers were complaining that they were going out of business and people were dying off and there was no one replacing them. But in actuality, there were people replacing them. They were just defining themselves differently, and those were the design galleries. But at the time, they were saying that they were the 20th century decorative art galleries. And at Christie's and Sotheby's, the departments of those auction houses were 20th century decorative arts. And so it was a different marketing speak around the material, but ultimately it was just a continuation of what the antiques dealers were doing, but in a new and fresh way. So I identified that pretty early on. And in fact, I was working for the magazine Antiques and I was selling advertising. And I thought, I'm going to get these guys to advertise with us because doesn't that make sense? And of course, none of them wanted to be affiliated with antiques. It was sort of like a 4-letter word at the time. So I ended up putting things together and realizing that the Brandts at the time also collected design and that there were all these people collecting design and there really wasn't a publication for it. And so I was living in Brazil and I mean, there's a whole long story there, but basically I came back and they asked me to work for them again. And I said, if I were you, this is what I would do. And I told Peter Brandt's son, a guy named Ryan Brandt, who I adored, that if I were in his shoes, I would be looking at design and architecture. And he came back to me a few days later and said, hey, we really liked your idea. Do you think you would stay on and do this with us? And I said, yeah, absolutely. So we started a magazine called Modern, which lasted for about 10 years. And it was design, architecture, decorative arts. I happened to launch it in 2009, just after the Yves Saint Laurent sale at Christie's, where the Eileen Gray Dragon chair sold for $26 million. which was an incredible record for the market. And I launched it in Basel, Switzerland, at Design Miami Basel on preview day. Somehow they let me make an offer where, in exchange for answering 5 questions, I would give the VIP visitors a free subscription. So I had this incredible list of subscribers by the end of our first show, and people who were genuinely interested in design and architecture. And we went on from there. We had a great run. The magazine was terrific. It was a lot of fun. I think it was maybe a little bit ahead of its time. We did the best with the resources we had. And then I realized from there that the market was shifting yet again, and that the advertisers were now putting their money towards live events. And so this is a trend that you see all over the place with advertising. So instead of advertising, spending like $60,000 to $100,000 a year in a magazine, they were spending that same money on participating in fairs where they could meet the potential clients in person. I thought, well, what better than to have a show? I started talking to an infamous show producer in New York called Sandy Smith, who unfortunately passed away about a year ago. He had started all the niche market affairs and really owned the relationship with the Park Avenue Armory. And we started talking about doing a show together. Later on, that became the Salon Art and Design, which I helped them start. It was sort of the sister fair to the Biennale, because in the beginning, we had started it with the Syndicat des Antiquaires to start off with. So we had a very interesting roster, and it was a very nice mix of dealers, 18th century to contemporary. But eventually it evolved into more of a design fair, and it's gone on to other iterations since.
It's true that if we look at French furniture, it's called up to the different kings and Napoleon and kings again. I mean, and so the evolution of furniture exists since a long time. Fashion also exists since a long time. I mean, people change tastes, but until not so long ago, maybe 20 years ago, people used to like antique furniture, as you said before, right? In America, in the Far East, everywhere in the world, people liked, as much as they liked old masters in paintings or impressionists, people who could afford it were buying antiques.
Yeah.
And then suddenly it changed. People like to collect contemporary art or modern art, and they change also in the furniture. What you're trying to say is that furniture and art followed a trend, right?
Absolutely.
But where do we stay now? I mean, in what kind of world are we today? Still the same? I mean, people still like modern furniture, modern design, or you see that there is again a change in the new generations?
Well, I think first and foremost, the collector of 25 years ago is a different kind of beast today than it was then. So I think that people are much more eclectic in their collecting today. So they are less afraid to mix an old master with modern furniture, right? Like you see a lot more variety in their collecting. Whereas at the time, in the 1990s, when I worked for the magazine Antiques, we were looking at, I remember there was a gentleman who had a collection of chests of drawers that were from all the major cabinet makers of the 18th century on the eastern seaboard of the United States. That kind of collector is very rare today. So I think that we've evolved, and I think that antiques actually are kind of on the up and up with younger generations. So it has a lot to do with affordability. And sometimes people find that they're just priced out of a market altogether, but it doesn't mean that they don't like it or they don't appreciate the work. I think it's having access. And I do see a lot of interior designers today saying these Chippendale chairs are $12,000 versus the Gioponti ones that are maybe multiples of that. So it's all cyclical. Eventually, everything kind of comes back. But I do think that design is very popular and it's growing more than ever, particularly in the contemporary space. There's so many incredible young designers who've come into the scene in the past several years, and that area has expanded. And actually, the 20th century historic has maybe had some contraction.
On October 21st to October 26th of this year, at the Hôtel des Maisons in Paris, which used to be the house of Karl Lagerfeld, so-called Hôtel Particulier, You have the next fair, the next Basel collecting furniture fair,
Mhm.
because you have 3 points of sale. You have Miami, right? You have Basel, and you have Paris, which is quite new in a sense. And yourself, even if you lived or you still live, I don't know, in Brazil, you share these two different places. Paris and Miami. Is it very different? Do you show different kind of things? Do they have a different taste?
Absolutely. So I think that the fairs take on a lot of the personality of their locales, right? And Miami is where we were founded, and Miami has a history of being a little brash, challenging the norms, thinking outside the box, kind of unabashed creativity. So you see that at the show. It's also our flagship fair. So this is the 20th anniversary of that fair specifically. It's our largest fair. Now, it's also the fair where you see the most contemporary material. And it's no surprise and no coincidence, but I think it's the 70,000 square foot tent. We have, over 70 exhibitors, and many of them are beginning stages of their career designers in the Curio program. And then many of them are some of our top international galleries that are doing, I would say, 65 to 70% contemporary, and the rest being 20th century historic and sometimes a little bit earlier. In contrast, Paris, we're in a giant tent there that's just across from our Barcelona park. And in contrast, we also get about 35,000 people through that show. So that's really remarkable.
This
And
fits very well with Miami because Miami has all this kind of architecture. So it's
exactly.
quite normal that it takes place there. But why Paris? Do you choose 18th or 17th century building house to do it?
Yeah. Yeah. Good question. Our European galleries have been asking us to do Paris for a very long time. They really felt that there was an opportunity there. And honestly, everybody comes through Paris. So it made a lot of sense. The interior design market comes through Paris. They still shop at the galleries, they shop at Les Pouces. And it's a really active community. It's a really active community. And many of our expert gallerists are based in Paris. So we decided that we wanted to give a different kind of experience. It was really that simple. We looked at many different options. At one point, we had even announced we were going to be on Place de la Concorde, which was a whole rigmarole that ensued with that. And we actually got canceled our first year, which was a very, very big learning curve for me about working in France. And really, we looked at over 45 different locations in Paris just about when we were giving up. The Hotel de Maison or Hotel Plaza de Borgo was presented as an option, and it hadn't been seen in a public capacity before. And obviously, with an 18th century background, I saw the potential in how you could do a really interesting contrast of the 20th century material in that architecture. But it was really a stroke of luck that we got that building and we could create something that was so intimate and that would draw people. And people love to come because of the building and the garden and the way that the galleries present in there. So it's something very, very special. And everyone remarks how happy they are to exhibit there at the end of the year. And it's worked really well with all the interior designers from around the world come, collectors from everywhere, the Middle East, South America, the US, they all come through that show. It's been really extraordinary.
You, of course, already know what's going to be showing in October. Can
Yep.
you give us a little bit of
Sure.
news?
Yeah, of course. Happy to. We have a handful of new exhibitors this year, one of which I'm really pleased to announce, which is Yves Marco. Yves Marco is the foremost specialist in like 1900 Vienna. So Wiener Werkstatt, Vienna Secession. He will be exhibiting with us for the first time, which is really wonderful. We also have another gallery called Side Gallery from Barcelona. They're going to be doing 1960s, 1970s Japanese design. A lot of that will be fresh material to me. So I'm really, really excited about it. We have a gallery from New York called Patrick Parrish. And Patrick has one of the early galleries from Design Miami. The other exciting exhibition is we have Benjamin Paulin, who's doing an exhibition in one of our courtyards, which will be an elaboration of a work that his father had already designed, where architecture and furniture kind of become one. I think that's going to be really exciting. There's a name of that exhibition too. I think it's called La Déclive. I'm really excited. We have Mitterrand Gallery, and I understand that they'll be showing the granddaughter of Leila Lan. She is a jewelry designer, and I mean, she still works in the same techniques that her grandparents worked. And in fact, she worked with them on several pieces, and she lives just outside of Paris and is making really beautiful works, including jewelry. So I think it's the jewelry that they're going to be showing, which I'm very excited about. We have Friedman Benda coming with like the most international roster of designers. So they've been doing the show since we started it, but they represent a designer from Israel, from Italy, Forma Fantasma, Joris Larman from the Netherlands. They have Frida Escobedo from Mexico, Elliot Hundley from the US. So they've got a very
So it
global
became
roster.
very global. I mean, once upon a time, people were either collecting their own country furniture, like American antiques, English antiques, French antiques, and then the French, especially the French furniture, was very much the furniture, right? Louis
Yeah,
XVI, Louis XV, Empire, and so on, Retour d'Égypte, all these things
exactly.
were mostly French.
Yeah.
But now it sounds that, like in the contemporary art, the design became very global. You talk about Japan, Mexico, Spain, plenty of different countries. But in the world of today, for instance, the luxury has a little bit of problems at the moment, right? I mean, is it the same with collectible design? I mean, people buy less, are more careful, prices went a little bit down, or what happens?
I think it's a different kind of purchase. I don't think you can really compare it to the luxury fashion market. I think that when you're talking about the objects that you live with, that, you know, it's going to be a thought out purchase in advance anyway. You don't buy it because you're going to like it for the moment. I mean, you look at it through the eyes of longevity, right? If it's good design, it has a sustainable aspect to it, right? You don't throw it away, you live with it, you pass it on. So I think it's a little bit different. And I think that the interior designers and the advisors are still as active as ever. If anything, it's growing because younger generations are really beginning to consider design for their homes as well.
Yeah, but as like for the antiques, there are
Hmm.
probably some, I don't know if you call them artists or designer or whatever, who will remain on high prices and so on, and others who won't, no, I imagine.
Yes.
In that sense, fashion. I mean, who are,
Yeah.
in your sense, the 20th century or 21st century designers who will become classics?
Yeah.
Because we
Yeah.
have seen, in the case of Jean Prouvé, for instance, right? He was building schools, houses for poor people, or very simple furniture and all that.
Mhm.
And suddenly, because of the market, Jean Prouvé became extremely important, expensive, and so on and so forth. This kind of thing is going to last or not in your mind?
I think it will, because if you look at the great masters of the 20th century and you look at, I like to look at mapping out post war growth, for example. You look at Brazil and you see that Brasilia was developed, and you start to look around at where there was great development. And from that came great architecture and design. And I think that there are still a lot of people who have designed and have not received their recognition yet, or material hasn't really come to the market in that way. And so I think there's still potential in terms of holding their place. I do think Privé will continue to have relevance. It's rare. So as long as there's scarcity, there's always going to be demand. Whether or not they hold their record prices, if I had a magic 8 ball and could tell you that, I would be investing a lot. I think what the difference is, though, between continued growth or holding value is important to distinguish, right? Because a lot of these pieces will hold value, but whether or not they're going to continue to reach soaring prices, it really depends on the piece. I mean, the best pieces are always going to have a market. So, for example, a couple of years ago, Jacques Lacoste had this beautiful Jean Royer set that he brought to Design Miami.Paris. And it was a Oris Polaris sofa. I think it was 2 chairs and 2 poofs. He sold it on opening day for 3.4 million euros. That's an astounding price for these pieces, but they had never been on the market before. They'd been with a single family. They were in mint condition. He'd been trying to get it for 4 years. that's a really rare find. And there's always going to be a collector for something like that. And I think those prices will always be realized. When we talk about a Jean Prouvé, the school chairs, I think they'll always retain value. Whether or not they're going to grow in value tremendously, that's I couldn't
I'm
say. That
asking you this question because my hometown being Turin, I knew since I was a child, for instance, Carlo Molino, right? And Carlo Molino was, yes, he was a good architect. People like he was a professor of architecture, quite an eccentric person, and so on and so forth. But nobody of his surrounding friends would have thought that he would have become a kind of an icon, right? So this is also interesting to see that
it
suddenly
is.
people get interested, or collectors or passionate collectors of.
Yeah. I think part of that, though, is driven by familiarity, too, right? So they say often that collectors like to buy things that remind them of their childhood. So that's just the perfect time frame, right? For people who have the means to be able to buy the things that remind them of their childhood, whether it's their grandparents' house or their own home. I mean, I bought because of that too. When I joined Design Miami, I bought myself a gift
Yeah,
when
because
I
you
was
are a collector yourself, right?
I mean, in the lightest sense of the world, I like objects that have an important meaning to me. They happen to be works from the 20th century. And I like to live with these pieces that have some kind of poignance in my life. So when I was growing up, my parents had two Joe Colombo Elba chairs. And I loved them because when I was little, they spin and they have a high back. So you feel very cozy in them. And my brother and I loved them. My mother decided that they were destroyed and got rid of them. And I was very young. I had no idea what they were, but I was very upset about it. And my brother and I made a big fuss about it. I had no idea what they were. I went to school in London and I was at a auction at Christie's South Kensington, and there were a pair of these chairs in the auction, and I took it. And to give you an idea of how long ago this was, I faxed the lot information to my mother with an arrow pointing at the price, which was probably like £3,000 at the time. I had exclamation point, and my mother was furious because she said, "I told you they were ruined. They were not salvageable. They've been gone." Well, at that point, I had no idea that there was a name to the maker of these pieces. And that sparked interest. In all these years, I wanted to have my Joe Colombo Elda chairs. And so when I finally got the job at Design Miami, I went out and I found myself a 1963 Joe Colombo Elda chair. It just reminds me of my childhood and has a lot of poignancy for me. And in fact, when I realized what it was, I found a photo of me and my father sitting in that chair when I was a baby, about one. And I took that photo when I started modern. It was on my wall. It's been with me through every stage of my 20th century career. And then I have some other pieces that have nothing to do with my youth, but things that I just really love. You
But
know,
collectible design, is it comparable to art? To buy a piece of furniture or chair or table or a console or whatever, is it the same that buying a sculpture, painting? Or you mentioned Lalanne before, right? They were
yeah,
doing
yeah,
both. I mean, they used
yeah.
bronze, they were doing objects, they were doing furniture, they were doing chairs, tables. I mean, and
Mhm.
nowadays they are considered great artists.
One thing I really don't like is when we start to like draw the lines between art and design. And I think it's a really tired conversation. For example, I think that there are creatives that do both, like the Lalondes or like many sculptors. And I don't think you always need to define it. I mean, design intrinsically has a function. That is a distinction. But I think there's some of the world's most creative minds are creating furniture. And that's the only distinction, is it has a function. So you look at, like, I think Joris Larman, who's an incredible designer, because he's working with technology, he's working with materials in novel ways. He's done some incredible works for Freeman Benda beyond his regular practice. I think that there's like a handful of people that you can look at in the same way.
There is this very interesting link, let's say, between architects and design. Sometimes, big architects who have built huge buildings or very important practical buildings in cities or museums or things like that, or churches, cathedrals, schools, and swimming pools, stadiums, very visible architecture. They also wanted to design a chair, a lamp, an object, a smaller object.
Yeah,
From Joe Ponti to Gaia Oleni. I think of Italy, for instance. There's a lot
completely.
of that.
And Jean Nouvel. Look at Jean Nouvel. Look at these
Yes, of
incredible
course.
buildings that he's doing and the furniture.
The furniture, yes. Of
Yeah,
course.
all of them really. I think all of the greats. See, Frank Gehry has done furniture. I mean, all of them have done furniture. And I think for me, if you can have a piece of that, a piece, like if you can have one little piece of their creativity, that's super exciting. I do think Jean Nouvel is somebody to watch in terms of furniture. We haven't seen what's come from him on the market so much.
But you said that between Miami and Paris, there is
Mhm.
a difference, right? Because if I understood well, Miami is also more about very contemporary, new designers, or how do you call them, artists or
Yeah.
creators of design. And Paris, it is too, but with a more classic eye. Nowadays, many art dealers and many people are looking at the Far East, for instance, opening in Korea, in Seoul, or in Japan, new fairs. And are you going to enlarge the Miami and Paris collectible design fair?
Yeah, actually, we have our first program in September in Seoul, South Korea. We will be doing an exhibition of 20th century contemporary Korean design with over 170 objects. It's an exhibition where many of the pieces are available for sale, but it's really more of a museum exhibition that we've put together with Hae Young Choi, who is a Korean curator. It'll be in the Zaha Hadid DDP building. And as you may know, Seoul is a UNESCO World Design City. I'm forgetting the actual terminology for it, but it's already been recognized for its design. And we're really excited about it. It's going to be about a 14-day exhibition. And it will be a part of a new program that we started, which is called Design Miami In Situ, which is really looking at localities and the communities there and sort of building and creating some gel to keep that community together, but also to leverage our international community to bring people to those locales. So this is a really big opportunity for us. We're really excited about it. We just did a small 1-day event or 2-day event in Aspen, Colorado, which we'll probably do again next year. We've done quite a number of travel programs, which we had to cancel through COVID and we haven't quite resurrected. But yes, we are looking at ways to expand the In Situ program in other locations.
What is your job? I mean, what do you do exactly? I mean, are you choosing the different designers? Are you organizing? How many people work with you, for you? What kind of people? I mean, how do you organize these fairs?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Because it's not only art, but it's also, I mean, it's a big
Yeah.
entrepreneurial job.
Yeah, it's been amazing, honestly. In the 10 years that I've been here, from the very beginning, Craig Robbins kind of let me he was our founder, the developer of the Miami Design District. He kind of let me take the helm and said, don't lose money. That was kind of the beginning, don't lose money. But really, it's my job since the beginning is trying to figure out how to keep the brand alive and relevant 365 days of the year. What does that look like? For me, that means how do we keep the dialogue and the commerce around design going all year long, ultimately. And so I have to be strategic, but I've had the most amazing experiences getting to be entrepreneurial. So we've done licensing deals in Asia, we've done digital marketplace, we've done the travel programs. We have something called Curatorial Lab, which allows us to do permanent or temporary commissions for real estate developers. I'm working with the roster of designers that we know. Then I manage the team at Design Miami. So with the team, I put together the team, I manage the team, I help set the course for the year, but we're a very small team. At the moment, we are 10 people.
In Paris?
It's just one team.
One
based
team. And
all
where is
over.
the headquarters? In Miami? Is in Paris?
The headquarters technically in Miami, but we basically started with a lot of remote work these days. We do have an office that we can go to at the DACRA offices, but ultimately we are dispersed all over. So we've got people in New York, Philadelphia, Los Angeles, Paris, and Miami. I like to say that the team, and the reason I say we is because there's nothing I can do without each and every one of the people on the team. But I like to say that the team is like, I'd compare Design Miami to a sleek racing yacht versus the cruise ship of the big fairs. You know, we pivot constantly. And I'm really fortunate that I have a bunch of other people who are as crazy as I am to want to keep doing this, because you're on a roller coaster and you're not getting off of it. You know, it just keeps churning out. And it's a lot of fun, frankly. I mean, it's a very rewarding and
But,
enriching
but
job.
yourself, you still live in Isla Grande in Brazil, or you
No,
move?
no, I wish that would be nice. No, I still have a home there, but I haven't been in quite some time. I live mostly between Paris and Miami. I've been really fortunate. This is my first 6 months in Paris, and I will continue to go back and forth as much as I possibly can. But I think Paris is really the center of creativity at the moment. And you want to have your finger on the pulse in Europe and the world. You've got to know what's happening in Paris.
But they also say that Milan is a very important city for design and architecture. No? You never thought about opening something there, or they refer to Paris?
No, I mean, I think we would be open to doing something in Milan. I think what's tricky about Milan is Milan gets over 300,000 people during Salone. You have to really fight for the attention. And it's a much bigger market than the collectible design market in terms of, you know, you meet industrial interior designers that are doing hotels and offices, and it just goes well beyond what we do. But it would be very exciting to be in Milan, of course.
So I know that you don't like to compare, but it's a little bit like Paris is still the haute couture capital in the world, right? I mean, all the big, great fashion designers, what they ultimately want is to show in Paris, no?
That's it.
From Valentino to Armani, also the Italians
All
or
of
the
them. Yep.
English or the Americans.
Yep.
So probably it's the same for the
A
collectible
hundred
design.
percent. 100%. You know, I think when we opened Design Miami Paris, I kept saying that this is the haute couture of collectible design. And we had a
Mhm.
board member at the time who was still on our advisory board and really wonderful. And he comes from the fashion world, who came and met me on opening day. And he knew what a trial it was for us to get the show off the ground. And he was remarked how incredible the show really was, and said, "You out French the French in their own backyard." And I said, "Well, then it's time for me to retire." Like, you know, there's no higher bar than impressing the French in design or creativity or fashion. So I don't think there could have been a better compliment, to be honest with you. And yeah, I think the world still looks at Paris as the epicenter of that bar.
There are many creators, many design collectible creators all over the world, but they like to show there, right? It's interesting that, just as we said about couture, that you choose l'Hôtel des Maisons, which was Karl Lagerfeld home, also because Karl was a very eclectic person. He was, of course, a fashion designer, but he was very keen on
Everything.
libraries and
Yeah.
furniture and all that.
18th century to contemporary. So he's like the perfect emblem of our market. It is amazing. And of course, it was the Pozzo de Borgo family's home at the same time, which is really interesting because so Carl had these apartments at different times. And the Pozzo de Borgo family has a museum in Corsica, a lot of their 18th century pieces. And they even had, you know, some of the great French painters were painting for them. But they're very interesting history too. And in fact, the person that we work with who manages the house, he is a Pozzo de Borgo and has incredible stories of like Baryshnikov performing, and you know, just incredible stories of things like his mother telling him to turn the TV off because Baryshnikov was going to perform and he wanted to just watch his show. And you know, it's very, very interesting stories about that
So
house.
I can see that you are in love with Paris, but tell me, what about Basel?
Yeah.
Is it a third pole? I mean, what is your relationship with Basel?
We actually decided this year for the first time in 19 years to forego Basel. We did not hold our Basel show this past June. And I really think that it's just a reflection of what the market wants. I think we did not have the kind of support that we needed to continue that show. And I think some shows have cycles, and that's really the truth. And it's too bad because it was a very meaningful fair for us. And I think that they kind of set the bar before Paris, and the best galleries with the best artwork still show up at Art Basel in Paris. And so I think it's a very important tentpole in the annual calendar.
But as I read about you, you say one of the things you say the most is I always look forward, right? But looking forward, I mean, here we talked about people. Yes, they are modern, like Jean Nouvel, like Pauvet, like Molino, like Carlos Scarpa, like others. Are the new ones very good? Is there a very lively, creative world of new furniture? That names that maybe we don't know or people don't know yet, only the very sophisticated people will know, or people who we talked about Molino, for his lifetime, he was not very famous. He lived in a small town in Italy, and then suddenly he became worldwide. So it may happen the same, right? In Brazil, in Korea, in Japan, in who knows where. I mean, do you research a lot on that thing?
Yes and no.
What is your eye on the contemporary, or the very
That's a good
contemporary?
question. I think there's a lot of conversation around materiality that's super important as we look for a more sustainable world. And I think that has to be a part of the conversation. So there are people that are doing really interesting projects, whether it's with like mycelium or recycled materials. So I do think that there are young designers that are coming out there that are solution driven, that are going to be recognized at a later date. Maybe they don't get the recognition now, but I do think that there's people out there that will get some recognition. From my point of view, I'm on as many juries or committees as I can possibly be. In fact, in Paris this year, can't go into too much detail, but we do have a big project with Apple, and that will tie into this a little bit. But I try to be more well versed in the types of projects that people are doing that could make a difference. And of course, designs that feel unique. It's so vast now. There's so many young designers out there. I wish I had more time to spend really focusing on that, to be
Because,
honest.
we talk a lot about stars like Frank Gehry, like Foster, like, Chipperfield, like Lorenzo Piano, like Jean Nouvel, or Tadao Ando, these very famous architects. Or you mentioned Zaha Hadid. But who are the new ones? They're not yet, for the large public, names that,
Yeah. There's an architecture firm that I've been really enjoying following, and maybe they're bigger than even I know because they're Chinese, and I think they do some work between the US and China. I think they're teaching in the US, but it's called Open Architecture. There are some really adept architects who are telling stories through their architecture that create a sense of place that I think are novel and a new way of creating built environments. So there are people, I don't know that they're doing design right now, but I am looking at the architecture community to try and understand better what is coming.
For the art, when they can afford it, because prices went very, very up. Of course, there are private collectors and amateurs, but there are also museums. And sometimes museums, unfortunately, cannot afford the prices of some work of art. But the new generation is very interested in contemporary art museums. And you just mentioned China, but I mean, in China, in the Middle East, they opened new museums in the United States and Europe too. What is the rapport between a collectible design and museums?
It's hugely important. I mean, unfortunately, not that many art museums have design collections and design curators, but the ones that do, their acquisitions have a huge impact on the market for those designers. If you look at the Houston MFA or the High Museum in Atlanta or LACMA in Los Angeles, their acquisitions are extremely important for this community. In fact, I had a request yesterday. Some LACMA would like to acquire a piece, and a friend was thinking of donating and asked me what were my thoughts on that and why do it. I think it's great for the museum to continue telling their timeline story, but also for the designer. It's just, to be able to say that you're in a museum collection gives you a whole new level of recognition and allows the collector to buy with confidence.
And all the phenomenon that happened in the past few years, I don't know if it's still like this now, the gender, this very important shift in the kind of artist that was chosen, and there was a lot of polemics about the fact that the gender doesn't make a good artist, but nevertheless, this was very much privileged in the last years, especially by museums, curators, dealers, and so on and so forth. Is it the same for furniture, for design?
Yeah, to a certain degree. I think, we took a heavy look at not specifically gender, but sort of underserved or under-accessed communities, whether it's BIPOC or gender, and said, how can we make our contribution to it? But I don't think we intentionally put people forward based on that alone. You have to have talent. And I think there was a huge uproar at the beginning of Black Lives Matter with Architectural Digest, where they featured a number of Black interior designers. And those interior designers said, how can you put me next to this guy? I've got 30 years experience working on these kinds of projects, and that guy just came out of school. And it was a very heated discussion at the time. And I think that you do have to take certain things into consideration, looking at different people's careers. But at the end of the day, it's the work that's going to speak for itself.
But what happened is that people travel more and more. They have a more global view of things, and maybe they put together things from different parts of the world, right? The taste is not anymore French or German or American, no. I was thinking when you talked, when we talked about museums, and I remember that in Dallas, Texas, there is a museum. I don't remember the name. It's a big museum in Dallas. There is an entire reproduction of a French house, with the old French furniture, and the same, more or less, at the Metropolitan Museum in New York, and so on and so forth. So maybe now they will reproduce more contemporary homes.
Maybe. I don't know. That's a funny thought. It's not out of the realm of possibility. I know that I haven't been to the Met in a while, but I know they were redoing a lot of the rooms too. So it'll be interesting to see what they do. They had an exhibition a couple of years ago where they reimagined a series of rooms in the Met. I forget the name of the exhibition, but it would probably be a really good example to cite because it was a contemporary take on it. Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what happens in the next 10 or 20 years.
As your previous boss, the founder, told you, you have to be careful with money, right? That's one thing. But do you think that people buy furniture or objects of design thinking about it is an investment, or they more do it because the taste is different and so they want?
There are people who buy for all different reasons. When I came into the market, I worked at Christie's for a moment. Actually, I had an internship at Christie's for the cycle of an auction in American paintings. And they said to me at the time, we never talk about these works as an investment. And for the first 10 years of my career, we never talked about work as an investment because the prices go up and the prices come down and the prices go up. So I don't know, are you going to hit it at the right moment if that's what you're looking for? But I don't talk about it. I still don't talk about it as an investment. The people who probably do, I probably don't speak to. I think that it will hold its value. It's very different from buying something that's going to be made for you or going to a big box furniture store. It will retain some value for sure. But I hope you buy it because you really love it.
And you expect a lot of people to come to Paris in October to travel around the Hôtel de Maison and see what's going on in the world.
I am certain. And in fact, we already have a large number of groups coming from the US specifically that are coming, one from Dallas, actually. And yeah, I know. I think we're going to have about 15,000 people this year. It's going to be great.
So I wish you good luck. Thank you very much
Thank
for
you.
having
Thank
given me the
you.
time to talk.
Alain Elkann interviews.